Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Kelsey Bixler, and I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at TouchPlan. And today, our webinar is going to center on a panel discussion on improving prefabrication efficiency and how manufacturing processes translate to construction. While I give everybody a minute to hop on here, I do want to let you all know that you might hear TouchPlan referred to during this discussion, but if you're interested in actually seeing the tool, we've got a couple options for you. So one, the demo on demand allows you to see a video walkthrough of TouchPlan. We also have live monthly demos. The next one is coming up this coming Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, so that's September 30th. And then finally, if you're actually interested in getting your hands on the tool, we have a free trial available as well. So I will be dropping links to those in the chat, so be sure to check those out after the webinar. On the agenda today, so we'll do brief introductions, we'll then get into our panel discussion, and then finally, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, be sure to drop those in the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll be getting to those at the end. Without further ado, I'd like to bring on our host today, Noah Baker. Noah, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelsey, and thanks everyone for joining up today. My name is Noah Baker. I'm the head of reseller partnerships and partnerships internationally here at TouchPlan. I've been at TouchPlan for a while. Really excited to have this conversation with the two individuals that we're bringing on, and really just kind of educate myself through their knowledge and everyone listening. But without ado, I'll introduce our two panelists here. We have George Hunt, as well as Marc Roberts. Marc and I met through our partnership with TouchPlan, and George is a good friend of mine and has been around TouchPlan as well as a deep knowledge in lean, but I'll allow them to introduce themselves. I'll kick it over to George first. George, I think you're on mute.
You're 100% right. So thanks, Noah. As Noah said, my name is George Hunt. I'm the corporate lean director for IPS-Integrated Project Services. So as Noah kind of said, my background, it's mostly in construction, and I was introduced to lean and lean construction probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. And since I've dove headfirst into it, and really, the manufacturing side of things and the history behind it. And I tend to geek out a little bit on the actual mathematics and theory behind why a lot of this stuff works. So it's great, and yeah, thanks for having me on the discussion.
Of course, thanks for coming. And Marc, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Hey, thanks, Noah. Hello, everyone. So I'm Marc Roberts. So I head up the operations for BBI Services based in the UK. So we work across the construction sector. My background, in essence, is started 30 odd years ago. I won't give you a whole kind of story on it, but in essence, I started out in automotive as a manufacturing engineer, designing production lines in first-tier automotive supply. And got a grounding with the Toyota boys in that environment. Since those, worked in all kinds of sectors, lean in supply chains for Dell, and through into the NHS, improving patient pathways, into steel making, and for the last 6 years across construction. In essence, just helping the guys get in the groove to improve is what I say. And on top of that, this is a sales pitch, but I've also written, because I'm quite passionate about people and engagement, so I've written a couple of books on engaging people and engaging your teams to realize the dreams. Okay, there you go. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick it off, I kind of want to hear from both of you. What exactly does it mean when we start talking about, how to influence construction in the ideology of manufacturing, and we're talking about the production mindset, and what exactly does that mean to both of you?
Okay, so I don't know. I'll go first. Well, for me, in essence, it's all about achieving smooth, reliable flow to the customer. And how do we kind of configure and enable that to happen? and that's all kind of supported through, in essence, kind of simplicity, visibility, efficiency, and effectiveness. And it's having that relentless drive to put those kind of principles in place. And I guess the key thing, particularly from a construction perspective, when you talk about flowing value to the customer, people naturally think about the physical goods, products, and services and materials through the construction site, but it's stepping it with the production mindset, rather, stepping it up a few thousand feet, looking at the business and the operations as a whole, and thinking about the projects that we flow through our businesses. How do we actually flow those through with a construction mindset? So it's almost relating each project flowing through our business like a production line building cars, so they're all in the same way, and learning from our experiences and locking in, building in quality into the and effectiveness into the way that we deliver our projects and satisfy our customers. That's my kind of take on it. What do you think, George?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of real good stuff in there. I think to add to it for me, just from the construction background and coming into, the whole idea behind, having a production mindset with it, I think, to me, it's really about just at a high level, understanding that, yes, we're not in a manufacturing environment, but to have a production mindset means that we look at what we do in our processes as a sort of production line, and that, you don't necessarily have to think of, you hear production and you automatically think we're in a manufacturing space or we're in a factory or something like that. That's not necessarily what you have to look at. We're not trying to necessarily make everything super automated and automatic. A lot of the things that Mark said there, keeping flow, value directly from, producing it to the customer of what they're actually looking for. That's the kind of idea that we need to be taking towards this. And I think, with it, just kind of, like I said, understanding that everything we do is a process of some sort. And so being that it's a process, we can look at it with this production mindset and actually start to apply a lot of the principles and theory behind why the manufacturing world kind of runs as efficiently as it does. We can take that and apply it to our processes. Meanwhile, they're different, but you can at least start to look at it from that lens. And to me, that's kind of what I see it as, taking that production mindset when we look at our construction projects.
Yeah, I agree. I guess some of the other things that kind of play into that is inevitably when I talk to some of our clients and some of the people that are helping them actually see and understand, it's almost, well, it can't apply kind of here. Don't you realize we've got such a lot of complexity, we've got challenges with skills and attrition and all these kind of variables, and inevitably what I try to explain to these guys and girls is that, well, they're the same issues that we actually grapple with in production and in manufacturing. There's a load of variables, and kind of, if you go back 40 years, they're smacked with all kinds of stuff. The key thing is they've learned to kind of eliminate some of the variables, all the issues, and learn each day to make the next day better. And that's ultimately where we're about. So it's trying to come in with that thinking and that mindset to say, well, how can we apply some of these things, not be full with our cups with all the reasons why we can't. So that's another part to play. And I think the lights have just gone out in this meeting room because I'm not moving around.
Yeah, I think to add to that, you brought up a good point there, and you used the word variables and things like that. I think the biggest piece for me when I first started to think about what production meant and what it actually applied to construction is that, yes, there's a whole lot of differences between a manufacturing space and an actual construction project, but understanding what all those variables are, and importantly, the variation between all of our processes and things that happen. No, we're not going to be able to change and control all that variation in the process like we can in a manufacturing space where it's very controlled. but just understanding what areas have that variation in it, right? What things can change from what we're planning to do. It helps us control that a little bit better, because I think, in general with construction, we don't necessarily have a good grasp on all the different things that are changing on a regular basis. We kind of just accept it as this is construction, things are going to go differently, things are going to change all the time, which yes, they are going to, but there's actually a lot more in our control than I think we normally realize. And so I think that's part of getting people to understand that, is that we can actually control our destinies a little bit better. And so kind of understanding where that variation comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's kind of two parts of this conversation, in the sense that I think, Mark, you and I have talked about, why don't general contractors look at all of their projects similar to how Toyota or how whatever car company creates their cars, right? Why are we changing the process on every single project or car and expecting the same result, right? In that translation to manufacturing, we've standardized that. And then the other side of the conversation is, how can prefabrication really affect that process and the outcome and efficiency of a project? So in both of your experiences, really, what does it mean to have kind of world-class prefab or module operations, and how has that affected the industry as a whole and the process of moving towards standardizing those construction projects?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll take this. I'll take this one first if you want, Mark.
Yeah, good stuff.
So I think it's going to depend, and I think that's an easy way out. But I think we really need to look at what we're thinking about when we say a world-class modular operation. I think when we're looking at it from a project standpoint, we have construction's unique in that we are building, we'll call them one-off projects every single time. And so every time we have a project, it's a unique project with different people, different plans, different, processes that we have to do. And so when it comes to looking at what, a world-class kind of modular operation would be, is kind of some of the things we talked about, a little bit ago, with flow of value and things like that. As much flow as possible where things aren't stopping, and where we're doing as much value added work with as little waste as possible. So if that means that, the offsite, everything is created and built in a full modular package that gets shipped directly to site, and all they're doing is kind of, we'll call it stacking blocks and putting them together. That might be what it looks like depending on what type of project you're building, but it could also look like, you're kind of prefabricating and pre-assembling different parts and pieces, and really it's minimizing the amount of time on the job site that the men and women actually have to spend putting these things together. So that way you can minimize the quality issues, and you can minimize the time that they actually have to spend out in the field, and all the elements and things like that. So, to kind of, again, kind of a cheap way out of saying it, it's going to depend, but I think it really, it boils down to, if you can, with your project, focus on creating the most value add as possible on the job site, and minimize the amount of wasteful activities that you find, whether it's with the job site or, in the back and forth and movement of material.
I'm with you. I also liked your hesitancy, George, on that world-class kind of term, because the minute you mention kind of world-class, people kind of go in a rabbit hole, and or sometimes get lost, and all of a sudden think they have to go out and benchmark this and that and the other, and sometimes lose sight of and also lose a lot of time in what they can actually set up and achieve themselves. There's a great saying. It says, I forget who kind of coined it, but it's basically, don't focus on your competitors, focus on your customer, and everything else will kind of follow. To me, kind of a world-class modular system, it does exactly that. It kind of first of all, it needs to be flexible and adaptable to kind of changing customer requirements and demands and specifications. So we need to kind of build that into it, and our ability to respond to those. But then the other kind of real key thing for me is being able to really build in quality into that process, into that product, rather than what I tend to see, if I'm going to insult some people here, but bolt it on. So we want to build it in, not bolt it on. So that's my 2 penneth worth.
So in that same breath, what's the best way to identify what necessarily should be built on site, what can be prefabbed, and how do you perfect that to have not bolted on and built in? How do you identify the things that should be shifted offsite?
Yeah, so that's quite a loaded question, and there's a number of things to kind of consider kind of here. For a start, it's considering kind of the scale, complexity, size, risk. They're all kind of few things, but in essence, if we kind of looking at it as kind of holistically and kind of big picture, all we're trying to do here is get back to this kind of customers at the forefront of everything. We're trying to develop the optimum way of working and the optimum process that flows value to our customers with a minimal amount of effort and frustration. So if you take that as your guide, and then say, oh, how can we actually do that? So what's exactly required, and then what is the optimum way to do this? And sometimes offsite it is a good solution. Sometimes there's way better solutions that are more practical. So if you're building a data center, for example, that's going on top of an existing building, on top of a large kind of multi-story resi block, for example, you're not going to be doing off-site modular cold aisles that are going to, because you're not going to be able to lift them up there or get them in the building. But a kit of parts may be really kind of beneficial. So it's never kind of one size fits all. It's very situational dependent. The other thing is you may have a near site or an on-site pop-up opportunity. So if you're on another site and you've got the opportunity to use a disused basement as you're building at the beach, you can potentially put in a pop-up flow line and use that basement rather than set up a facility and rent a near site shed or something to do that. You can make the use of what's available depending on how and where you're constrained. Sometimes you haven't got the luxury of those sort of things. So there's a number of facets to kind of consider, but yeah, it's not, offsite isn't always the best option.
Yeah, to add to that too, with it not always being the best option, I think, if you take the traditional delivery methods that are doing construction, which is design, bid, build, obviously now we're getting much more into, where we're bringing builders in earlier to have some discussion on design. If the project itself wasn't designed to be built in a modular or prefabricated manner, it's much, much harder to be able to do that after the fact. So the earlier we can get into that discussion, or if the designers of the project are thinking ahead to say, we want this to be, as modular as possible. We want this to be something where we can prefabricate as much as possible. There's ways to design the layout and how things are going so that they can easily be packaged and modularized. I think, inward at IPS, we've been experiencing that the past few years is, iterating on that. How do we design so that way when it comes to construction, it's easier to be able to package those things together, kind of as Mark said. And I think, what you look at is, depending on the project and the complexity of it, there may be, opportunities to, put something off-site that takes a lot of time normally in the field. And that's something you want to look at, is if there's something that takes a whole lot of time in the field, maybe that's a process or something that you move off-site. The other thing to think of too is, not only is it going to something that you want to move off-site, but where's the location that these things are going to be prefabricated at and manufactured? We work, in the pharmaceutical and biopharma industry. And so there's players from all over the world that we handle. And so, is it always the most efficient process to, the manufacturer of a certain equipment might be somewhere in Europe, right? But we're building here in the United States, but also they're getting parts from somewhere in Asia. Is it all the best situation to send it all to somewhere in Europe and then back over? And kind of as Mark said, right, every time you're sending something somewhere other than directly to the job site where it's going to get installed, it's that added piece of risk there that, there's things that can happen in shipping where your material are getting damaged or the material just doesn't show up. Boats can get stuck sideways in a canal and then things shut down for quite a long time. You know what I mean? And so there's all those things to consider. But I think the important part about it is that we need to start bringing that discussion to the forefront of the project, right from the beginning, to say that, as a goal, we want to try and minimize, the waste that we have on this project. We want to start to try and minimize the time and the waste we have on the job site. How can we design this in a way and use, our network, with the supply chain and our designers and contractors to really kind of make this an efficient process? And that's really, everywhere from the design down through manufacturing and building the modular or prefabricated pieces to actually installing it on site.
No, I totally agree there. And I think when we talk about that mixed model of mixing in prefabrication, looking at how manufacturing processes translate to construction, Mark, for you, what are some of the, let's say, top 3 things that you identify in terms of making that decision, right? And George was kind of talking about it, whether the materials come from Asia, go to the UK, go back to the United States. There's a logistic aspect of it, but when we're talking about kind of the work process, the planning process, and how people are going to accept that, are there any pointers you can give our listeners in terms of how do you make that decision in the moment? And you kind of said those opportunities come and arise. How do you see those happening?
Right, so you say 3 things. So I guess the 3 things for me, and kind of George touched on it kind of nicely with that kind of almost like if you do like a map the actual material flow, where are we kind of shipping things, how much stuff is kind of coming from different countries and going into one source, and then to compile a subcomponent, and then is that going shipped overseas to then compile a bigger sub-assembly? It's almost having sight of that. So I guess if you think about that scenario, ultimately what we want is minimal touch with a high degree of certainty and confidence. So it's those 3 things, because minimal touch will drive down costs and boost up efficiencies. And then if we can lock in, because ultimately one of the main reasons why we're pushing stuff off site is but potentially to kind of de-risk things. So we take it out of that kind of weathered environment, take away some of the variables. So in essence, what we're gunning for there is certainty and a high level of confidence, so that when we're planning kind of 9 o'clock Tuesday to install a bathroom pod on apartment 4A or whatever it may be, then that actually happens like clockwork. That's what we're after. So it's designing the processes to kind of feed and fit those kind of principles, really. With the I guess you also mentioned you touched on kind of mixed model. So that's another pointer in itself, because sometimes when we're looking at modular ways of working and we're looking at them almost package by package or item by item and trying to tease out the best way of doing that, inevitably when we say actually by the time if we wanted to kind of put in a prefabricated cladding product as an example, by the time we've added up a near site or an off-site facility, rented that land or that building to do all that, it all becomes kind of not viable from a cost perspective. So sometimes looking at things in isolation isn't the best way forward. So if we can look at things and think of like almost a mixed model production line, so that's aligned and coupled with the stages of construction. So for example, if we had a shared facility that would, while the guys were constructing the envelope of a data center, for example, as they're doing that, you could flow down that facility a unitized cladding product, and potentially even with a shared workforce. And then as the project actually transitions to fit out, that same facility and that same production line and space could then start to flow MEP modules as an example. And you're using that shared facility and some of the principles in terms of assembly. When we look at process simplification, we can actually develop the processes as such so that our workforces can become far more flexible and able to build different products and in a real and still lock in real high levels of quality in doing so. And when you look at solutions in that manner, all of a sudden you're solving a raft of problems. So a lot more solutions become cost viable, but more importantly than that, one of the big things that's smacking us across the sector at the minute, particularly in the UK, is a shortage of skills. We haven't got enough people, and different contractors are kind of stealing from the same pool, really, in essence. So if we can kind of, back to our collaborative kind of mindset as well, think differently and broader and challenge everything and the concepts and take people out of pigeonholes and gain more flexibility in the way that we do things. Happy days.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, when we think of a collaborative planning method, and George and I have talked relentlessly about, lean methodology or collaboration, what would you both say is kind of the best way to bake collaboration into the mix between offsite building and on-site building, and how to do that in the most efficient manner? I'll kick it over to George. Picking on you, George.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's also a loaded question. You got a loaded questions for us here. I mean, really, the best way to bake it in, I don't know if the only way that I would say to bake it in is it has to be your mindset from the start that it's going to be collaborative. And because we're talking about either prefabrication or modularization, there's no one trade, there's no one designer that has their hand in something like that, right? It's not like we're just talking about framing, or we're just talking about electrical or just mechanical. There's a whole host of people who have to have their hands in whatever we're prefabricating or turning into a module. And so you have to collaborate. You have to bring all of them in and have to have that mindset that we all have to approach this from a standpoint of how do we make this work to the point where we can get it assembled offsite and then get it shipped to site and actually get it installed in the most efficient manner. And it can't be done in a silo whatsoever. And that really needs to start from the beginning. And kind of to go back on a point I said before is, if we can start that in design versus just, coming up into the construction and saying, okay, how do we take this design and let's all work together to prefabricate it? It goes a long way, because you can then design it so that way those systems can work together even better than they do, in a design that you might have already produced. So that way they can break it up into something that can be better manufactured. I think that that's kind of the part, or kind of the point where people can really, get value out of asking a question from someone who might not be in their own discipline. I think that's one of the things that I found is that, while yes, the plumber and the electrician, they're not doing the same exact thing, but there might be an idea that comes from one of them and comes from that collaboration. So when it comes to, having ideas of, hey, how do I take my scope or my trade or whatever I'm doing and put it in a way that's a little bit more, conducive to being modularized, someone else might have an idea, because that, trade or that discipline, they might have done something similar and be like, hey, maybe we can box it this way, or maybe we can do this. So that really needs to come at the beginning, and I think that really needs to be the mindset of folks coming into it. Otherwise, I think you're kind of destined to have a lot of crossed wires and people not really understanding the intent of what you're going at.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of well, everything that you just said there, George, and kind of building on a little bit and bringing it back to some of the production kind of thinking as well. So to foster that kind of collaboration is helping. It's helping all the entities see and understand, and to start with. So one of the cute little things that they do in a production environment. So if you imagine guys working on a car track, inevitably they have a 3x3 principle, and in essence, what it means is each person is trained and competent on a minimum of 3 processes. And you've got 3 people that are trained on each process to cover the kind of sickness absence kind of side of things. But forget the 3 people trained, the where I'm coming from in terms of that really helps foster the collaboration. The reason why they train a person on 3 processes. So if I'm on my track, my main process would be kind of, let's say, station 10, but I will also be trained on station 9 and station 11. So that way I understand my supplier and also the potential things my supplier can do to give me bad product. So I can then give feedback and coaching my supplier when I get sight of these things. I know the issues. I understand their world and that environment. And similarly, by getting trained on my internal customers process and having not necessarily trained, even having an understanding in our world and an appreciation for that, I can really understand what I do that could impact my internal customer and ensure that I'm not passing on poor quality to that customer. So that type of thinking really aids kind of collaboration. It's insight and understanding. I don't believe people are willingly trying to set the trades up or willingly kind of leaving things in disarray. A lot of it is sometimes they're just not aware. So yeah, so I think that can play part to it, and kind of linked to that 3x3. There's also kind of I talk about 3 rules of quality, which are dead simple, and it's kind of don't accept a defect, don't make a defect, and whatever you frigging do, don't pass one on. So that's another thing that just aligns to it.
And kind of on that point, is there a cultural change in how things are done in construction that were done in, say, manufacturing, or kind of the points you made? Is there a massive cultural change that we need to go through to get that mindset? Or are we almost there, George? Kind of, let's talk about what we need to change about how we think about construction and how everyone on the job thinks about it to get closer to that kind of Toyota perfection, let's say.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that needs to change with the culture of construction. Not even just when it comes to production mindset, but I think just in general, with how we talk about and how we consider one another when we're thinking of these projects. Right now the construction industry, it's, as Mark mentioned, right, we have a skills shortage. So I think with the US, they kind of said that for every 5 people that leave construction, there's only 1 that's coming in. So we're at a huge deficit, and there's not people coming in to replace it. And so I think part of that comes from the culture around construction, where we don't really look at our people within our process as actual people, right? It's almost like we're all just a cog in the wheel, and we're doing what we're told to do. So I think that from that standpoint, we need to take a change in our culture and how we look at one another and how we look at the men and women who are actually in the trades and in our industry. That aside, I think from a standpoint of the production itself, I think we just need to look at design and construction as a production piece at all, right? I don't think there's when you talk to a lot of folks, I don't think they necessarily look at what we do as production. I think we look at it as, here's the things I need to do. there's all my steps, but we kind of look at it as in a silo. But, when you take the step back kind of to where we were talking about with that production mindset, I think we need to do a better job with just actually looking at what we're doing holistically as a system and actually understand and kind of agree we are a production system, whether we want to say it or not. We're producing plans and drawings and specs, down to we're actually producing, the physical buildings and components that are going into it. There's a process, there's steps to be involved, which makes this kind of a production system. And because of that, we can, take a lot of the concepts and principles that are applied to production systems in a manufacturing world and actually apply them to what we're doing in construction. Albeit, yes, it's very different. There's a lot of different variables and things, but from that conceptual standpoint, we can apply them to it. And I think that's kind of where we're at, and at the, really the precipice of it. People are starting to see that, with the growing, demand and discussion around tech construction and things like that. People are starting to understand that, this is a production system. We can look at this a little bit more from that mindset, and we don't have to do things the same way we've always done. And I think, construction's always kind of got that stigma to it, is that we're kind of slow to change, but realistically we're not actually terribly slow to change. There's a lot of innovation and a lot of things that have changed within the industry. I think we just kind of need to shift our mindset a little bit more when it comes to this to be able to apply a lot of these, principles and things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That the starting point is the acceptance that it is a production system. I know, kind of working in healthcare and in hospitals, that's exactly the message that we got across to the people there, that the doctors and nurses. You are a production system. You're producing ideally happy and healthy people out of sick people. And how can we do that and make the increase our throughput of happy and healthy people with confidence and certainty? But yeah, so exactly that. So that's the starting point, is accepting it is a production system, and then collectively, how can we actually kind of make it work? But it actually does start right from the top, and has to be actively encouraged and supported, and driven to say, like, in the early outset. So George, you talked about kind of the collaboration and those kind of desired behaviors and stuff. Almost we need to start in design but as early as possible. We should start engaging people, setting the expectations, helping them actually set up for success. If you think about manufacturing processes, a lot of those processes have stood around for years and years and years. Now in construction, some of the solutions that we're building, we've got iconic buildings, legacy kind of things, but the processes haven't stood around for years and years and years. We've got transient kind of teams kind of coming on it, but we don't really provide enough forethought, in my mind, to actually consider and actually look at the potential problems and the actual process and work on the process before it becomes a problem. And do sufficient work kind of up front, almost setting that team and that project up for success in the right ways, and kind of then link to that when we're actively in the mix and in the flow of things. It's as you touched on as well, George, it ultimately comes back to having that respect for people, and which is drilled hard, particularly in the Japanese companies. Yeah, so one example, working with so we take clusters of teams across the construction sector to the Toyota plant in the UK. It's the engine plant up in Deeside, with the Total Lean Management Centre and the boys there. And we do a construction to production sort of masterclass there. And so they go around and they see ultimately what kind of great looks like in a production kind of sphere, and see how that kind of translates and transcends into the construction world. Where are the golden nuggets, and literally what could be transferred. But one of the key things that kind of came out of that session, some of the thinking, back to this respect for people, if the guys on the line there on that engine plan are starved with work, or there's an issue, or there's a problem on the line, and they're waiting for something, whether it's a line stop or they're waiting for materials, and they've got nothing to do, all the people on that line are trained to stand with their hands behind the back and do nothing. And that was like a real awakener for some of these construction guys and girls that attended. They're like, what the heck? Because what that does is it starts to highlight that, first off, that there's a problem, yeah. Whereas opposed to sometimes the natural reaction, if so there's an issue and you can't do something, that you'll probably do a workaround, or I'll look busy, I'll do this instead, which probably isn't the right thing on the critical path to do. It doesn't expose the problem. And sometimes if there's a leader or a manager walking around, all of a sudden, yeah, let's look busy and do something and make it look. So all that waste and opportunity is naturally hidden from a cultural response, where the Toyota guys are taught to highlight the waste and opportunity, like that, and flag, really expose, make it so apparent that there's an abnormality and they need support. And almost linked to that, back to it, and it's a cultural thinking mindset thing as well. One of the things that came out from that session, the other part of the thinking, is that they say the most precious thing anyone can give you is their time, because they're not going to get it back. So as a leader, the thing that you must be most respectful for is people's time and the utilization of that time. And if people aren't utilized and you're not putting them to work in the right way, then you're disrespecting that individual. So as opposed to if you saw someone waiting and not utilized, sometimes there's a temptation for some leaders I've come across to give that guy a good kind of going over and tell him to get and do something, as opposed to see it as a reflection on their leadership. But that's just an example. When we're talking culture and mindset, I think it's a good comparison, how things have got to change.
Yeah. I think, you know what, to build on that, it brings up a thought in my head. Is a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a workshop and we were talking through, it's not my saying, but it comes to that point, like you said, is they're taught to bring out the waste and draw attention to it. But the kind of saying that was talked about was the whole idea of, you know, don't just stand there, go do something, but instead we need to shift it to the exact opposite of don't just do something, stand there, right? Yeah, and that's exactly like you're talking about. It is like, you know, if there's a problem and there's you know, issue here, if, you know, granted, right, we don't necessarily need to just stand there and not do anything, but it draws attention to what's going on. It draws attention to everyone that there's an issue here, whether it's the flow on the job site and how things are moving or whatever it is. And so it brings us to, well, what do we need to do to fix it? How do we change it? How do we prevent this from happening again? And I think that mindset shift is a great one that you bring up, is that, you know, the manufacturing world, it's brought out to, we need to bring up the things that are issues and figure out how to change them. Whereas I think in construction, a lot of times we try and hide it because it's a lot of, you know, cover your, you know what, you know, and if we're going, we just got to look busy. But I think we need to get to the point where it's less about looking busy and it's more about how do we get it so we don't run into an issue where you're standing around and you're actually doing something that's value added versus just busy work that, like you brought up, Mark, it could be messing somebody up downstream and you don't even realize it because you're just trying to go do something that, so when the boss walks by, you know, they look at you and go, oh, okay, great, he's working. But yeah, no, sorry, that came to my mind when you said that it just came up the last week. So.
Especially, Mark, as Americans, we love to look busy when we're not doing anything. Pace around, do something of that nature. But when it comes to tools like TouchPlan or planning process improvements, how do those tools, something like TouchPlan, what tools you use to improve that collaboration? And more importantly, what tools could you use to highlight the room for improvement? And what have you used in both of your experiences to really help you make that mindset change? Don't all jump out at once, but
Do you want me to kind of, I can speak initially to that. I think first off, the move to a digital platform like TouchPlan, how that really kind of just changes the game. But by its very nature of being digital, what it provides is now we can, all the collaborative planning sessions no longer need to be constrained to a sticky note wall on site. We can now extend that collaborative planning to these offsite facilities and deep into the supply chain, even like third-tier suppliers. Get them pulling into that session, looking at the next 12 weeks, drawing out all those kind of make-ready needs, ensuring that we've got confidence because we now can extend our reach into an alignment with our collaborative kind of focus, and also gain such more kind of transparency, which naturally improves the way that we can coordinate things. And then in the right way, using the right mindset, we can actively support each other to make sure that the right thing happens at the right time in the right way.
Yeah, I think to add to that, with today's day and age where, everything, we have the technology to literally have, this discussion over video, worlds apart. I think, it brings about the idea that we need to make sure that everyone's on the same page, and we have the ability to do that. And I think where we have suppliers that are all over the world, we have, trades who, while we're working in a specific area, they might not even be extremely local to the job site that we're trying to build on. Having that visual communication is key, and making sure that everyone's on the same page. So, products like TouchPlan, having a spot where anyone can see it at any time, wherever they are, and have a very clear understanding of this is where we are in the process, this is where we're going in the process, so that everyone's on the same page, that needs to happen, right? You can't have people manufacturing things out of sequence that, they're not needed on site for 6 months, but, the thing that's needed tomorrow hasn't even been started yet because they couldn't see exactly what was needed from the people in the field. And so, tools like this give us that ability to be able to really extend and, project out far enough so that everyone can look at it, be very transparent on where we're going with this. And it really, right, it enables us to have that super deep collaboration that we need for this to be successful. So that way we don't, run into points where people are doing things that they don't need to be doing, that either aren't on the critical path or aren't needed by their internal customers downstream. I think that's one of the biggest things that, something like TouchPlan helps with, is to get that transparency together of the plan. Where are we all marching towards? Where are we all going to? So that way we can work on the right things, because otherwise working in silos with how, we do things normally, right, we see how many problems we run into on job sites normally, especially right now with the supply chain being the way that it is. I think we're having to order things earlier and earlier. So the best way to do it is just being, transparent with and being able to show everyone exactly what we need to be doing when we need to be doing it.
The other thing that I'd add, I've seen projects kind of really embrace platforms like TouchPlan to a degree where I think, we've talked a lot about kind of moving, in essence, kind of construction to production and that production mindset. I think some of these construction sites have taken collaboration and that kind of clarity and ways of working to a level where actually the production guys can actually learn a lot, and we can take some of that thinking back into production. So if you think about how some of these companies in the manufacturing world are developing and designing, releasing new product and doing new product development, that's a fantastic platform that they can really exploit, that will really condense that timeline, that NPD timeline, considerably compared to how they currently do it. From what I see, there's a lot of opportunity there to bring things from construction back into over the other way. So it should be two-way kind of learning.
Absolutely. And I think the three of us could go on for 2 more hours, but in the in the case of our timeline and our attendees and their busy days, I kind of want to pass it over back to Kelsey and allow her to answer some of the kind of questions that we've heard from the audience and get your insight on those. So thanks so much. And Kelsey, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So we've got a couple questions from the audience. The first one is, what kind of immediate impacts will businesses see when teams start to learn from manufacturing production systems? George, can I kick it over to you to start?
Yeah. So let me caveat this question first with that. I mean, I think in that question itself, we're talking about what immediate impacts we can see when we learn from it. But the fact that we learn, it kind of already implies that there's a timeline there where we have to learn, right? And so the immediacy of what we end up seeing, right, it might not be as immediate as a lot of people might want to see. So I would caveat that first to say, you know, listen, there's obviously going to be the benefits and impacts that you'll see, but, you know, just give it some time. Make sure that you have a clear understanding of there is going to be a time frame where, you know, the project, the people, we have to learn, right? As humans, we have to learn. We can't just take something, pick it up, and, you know, it's not like a machine. You switch something and flip a switch and it's doing something different. We have to learn. So there is going to be a learning curve. So there's going to be, you know, a little bit of a delay in the direct results you see. But I mean, I think if you just look at it from a standpoint of, you know, the job sites, there's, you know, you're going to have immediate impact to the timelines of what you're spending on the job site itself with installation. You know, you're going to have a higher quality that you're going to see. You know, what we've talked about, if you're building a lot of stuff offsite in a controlled environment, you're going to have higher quality there. And then also safety too when it comes to the job site. You know, I think a lot of the stuff, you know, the hours spent on the job site in the field actually installing, you know, there's a lot of research out there that says, you know, obviously the higher those hours are, the more safety incidences there are. So, you know, if doing it offsite in a controlled environment and spending less time installing it on site, you know, can reduce those hours. I mean, I think those are some pretty, you know, relatively immediate impacts that you'll be able to see. Like I said, with the caveat that obviously, you know, if we're learning, there's going to be a delay in exactly seeing those kinds of results.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. First thing, I always get nervous when people say kind of what immediate benefits. So I'd say because immediate is like kind of like magic wand and yeah, let's see it now. Yeah, why? Yeah, so I always get nervous with that word immediate. But I'd say in project benefits. So I had the pleasure of working with a fantastic team in Cluny, near Dublin in Ireland. And they were really embracing all this kind of stuff. Their project director was a guy that wanted to make it happen, not just kind of let it happen. Yeah, fantastic team to work with, absolute pleasure. But anyway, they put up a modular solution, all kind of working together. There was 2 great subcontractors involved as well, and so it was a modular MEP solution that they kind of came up with a near site pop-up kind of facility. And the benefits that they got, just in that case, in project, they boosted their efficiency by 40%, improved quality, my light's going off again, by over 60%, and talk about safety, they reduced the working at height by over 70%. And for this big social media company, that was the mega hook, because obviously safety first. So demonstrating that they can reduce working at height and reduce that risk by over 70%. Yeah, let's do it. They weren't so convinced if we'd just talked about improving efficiency. But yeah, there's a whole host of benefits, and I said they achieved all those in project and saved a chunk of time off the timeline of that fit out process on the back of it.
Yeah, that definitely shows a real impact on the people on the job. So that's awesome. Another question I've got for y'all from the audience. So how do you identify the primary reasons processes aren't flowing? Mark, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, so how do you identify the primary reasons why processes aren't flowing? Simple answer, go look, see. Yeah, so just go and have a look, stand back, study, get the people that are working it as well. Make sure people are positioned so that you're not, I'm not saying go and time and motion that these poor people, but stand back, observe, see what's happening, and you'll identify it straight away. So why are people kind of walking here, there, and everywhere? Why is this getting dropped down there and then moved across? Yeah, seeing is believing, but yeah, don't take it as read. And sometimes the trap is sometimes teams will get people together and map what they think is happening, or even worst case, what should happening, and not really be aware of what really is happening. And that's where all the surprises occur. And then once you start actually walking the process and seeing firsthand actually what's going on, there'll be a raft of surprises, and then I'll guarantee it will be married up with responses. Yeah, but this isn't normally the case, and you should have come last week when we were doing it. It worked, yeah, easy. It's just because you've turned up that now we're getting these issues. I always get that, but yeah, just go look, see is the recommendation there.
I like it. George, what do you think?
I would echo everything Mark said there. I think go look, see it. It's a perfect way to put that. I think what I would also say just in general with it, that we don't do a very good job of figuring out why processes don't work. I think, we have a habit of just saying this didn't work and then just blaming someone for why it didn't work. But I think something that a lot of the listeners might be familiar with is the concept of the 5 why, and kind of asking the multiple questions of, okay, well, the process didn't work, so why didn't that work? And just continually, kind of to Mark's point, is kind of dig a little deeper, investigate more, ask folks, okay, if this didn't work, what happened there? And then if that didn't happen, right, what happened there, to get to that root cause. And I don't think we do a very good job of that just across the board as an industry, of really figuring out, what is the root cause behind why it failed. And, to the point I brought up, early on about the variation within our construction industry, there's no way we're going to attack and be able to address any of the variation and make things, safer and more efficient if we have no idea what actually caused it. So we need to do, and more of that asking and more going and seeing what actually happened. Otherwise, we're not going to understand anything that actually did happen, and we're just going to be chasing our tails the entire time.
Yeah, there's a few caveats there as well. I totally agree with everything you say there, George. It's about being constantly curious, but and almost embracing the kind of Sherlock Holmes kind of side of things. So if you think of old Sherlock Holmes, he never solved a murder from behind his desk. So he's going out and seeking the evidence, but it's asking the right questions of people as well. And it's not kind of putting across your opinion or your assumptions, but it's learning from what's in front of you, and as I say, seeking the evidence. So if you think of Sherlock Holmes, or even someone from CSI New York or Miami, they're not going out putting their opinions and suggestions of who murdered who. They're seeking the evidence and asking the right questions.
Love it. We've got another interesting question about leading buy-in and leading success. So does successful prefabrication, that was a tough one, and project delivery require initial owner buy-in, or can it be led by the architect / engineer / contractor / trade partners? George, I'll pitch this one to you first.
Yeah. Does it require? I mean, I would say this is that, when you call successful, you got to define what successful is. I mean, I think absolutely having that initial owner buy-in is critical to having a very successful project, let alone a project where you're looking at prefabrication and modularization. But I think, having that initial buy-in from them is important, because ultimately that's your customer at the end of it. All of you doing the design and construction, you're building for that owner. And so if they're looking at it and they want to say, we want it shorter time as possible, as cheap as possible, prefabrication and modularization, right? That might be the goal there. But I think even if you don't, you have an owner who's not interested in it, but gives you the leeway to say, well, if you're going to design it and build it the way that, again, meets our standards of what we need to do to make this successful, I think it can be. I just don't think it's going to be as impactful as it would be if you have that owner on board at the beginning. So there's always those kinds of different levels of success with it. It can be small success within just a construction and design team. But if you get that owner buy-in, then I think you really can get that wholesale, full project. This was extremely successful from everybody.
Yeah, Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd say in order for it to be successful, it needs to be compelling. And if it's compelling, it will be successful and you'll get the buy-in from everyone. It should be a win-win all around. And it'll be almost kind of, actually, there's no reason why we wouldn't be doing this. So far as you take that attitude and make sure that it is compelling, then it also prevents you from doing something for doing something's sake. Which is what I've seen in the past as well. So, oh yeah, we're doing modular because we measured on something like horrendous like PMV, pre-manufactured value, which is the percentage of the beast that we're building that's actually done off-site. It has no freaking purpose and means nothing and drives the wrong behavior if you're not careful. But yeah, so avoid that tick the box sort of scenario and temptation. Ensure that it is absolutely compelling, and I guarantee you'll get the buy-in that you need, and it will be successful because you'll get the commitment behind it.
Awesome. Well, that looks like all I've got. Noah, if you want to hop back on real quick, I know we're at the top of the hour, but that is it from me. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining, guys, and everyone who took the time today. We'll see you out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.